Hello again, my friends. This is Rick, the Fat Man GM, and this is your place at the table. Welcome to my revisitation of Fass's Star Wars, or Fass's Star Trek role-playing game system, and I'm coming into the Orions. The Orions are a very interesting element within the Star Trek universe, which, sadly, exception in the near recent Enterprise series, which we actually seen more Orion interaction than we had in the Next Generation or DS9 or Voyager. It's just, these are the original Ferengi, if you will, but there's so much more, and they're so much more complicated and complex than what they're portrayed as. And the Orions are an interesting race to begin with, to start with. Their entire system. I can do an entire set of a series of videos on the information that's just in this one book. We're talking historical facts and things like this based off of course, beta canon, because there's so little actual game canon to establish, and most the designers and writers for Star Trek, for FASA back in the day, they worked with what they had to work with. And of course, the first thing that comes to most people's mind is a mistake, a fallacy. And I think this is one of the reasons that the Orions got downplayed in a number of TV series, because of the green Orion slave women, or the slave trade, the fact that the Orions are well known for being slavers. Yes, that's a cultural thing. And as much as we want to talk about social justice and PC and other BS today, the fact of the matter is that not all societies and social mores are going to be the same as ours. And is it our burden to go around minding our neighbor's business to the point where we're trying to force them to be what we think they ought to be. And I have mixed opinions. I do not, in most aspects, I think leave and let live, be leave alone. And so if certain cultures and countries in the world want to act and do what they do, and their own populations are accepting it and tolerating it, it's not necessarily our business to step in and police it or to make a change. We don't have to like it. We don't have to talk to them. We don't have to trade with them. We don't have to condone it. But it's the end of the day. But it's also important to note in game relations that it's a misconception that it's more like an indentured servitude, and that we're talking some very capable women who are quite fine-tuned to their abilities to influence male minds, or weak male minds. And it's not hormones. It's not certain kinds of drugs. It's just they're very practiced in our own human cultures. It wasn't all that long ago that the geisha is an example from Japan of this. The courtesans of Europe, they served a role. And of course, there's going to be a lot of people who will bark about, well, that was then, this is now. Well, that's true, but once again, we're playing a different race, and you don't have to dial into that piece. But I thought I'd get that out there at the very beginning. Now, another thing that makes that the Orions always interested me, from the playing perspective of all the races in Star Trek, the mainline races, we see there's more beta knowledge in game material for the Orions than the rest, even the Klingons. I mean, my favorite go-tos for Star Trek has always been Klingons and then Orions, and you have to really understand the Orion mindset and their philosophy on the universe, so to speak, and the fact that the Rigel system itself, which gets referred to numerous times, especially the Rigel pleasure planet concept. Commander Riker was always talking about going to Rigel or coming from Rigel, blah 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 blah, and there's reasons for that, obvious reasons. But the Rigel system is extremely ancient, very old. It's actually the home of several ancient races that have come, prospered, and then since faded away and were replaced by etc., etc. And so, in the great scheme of things, the Orions are a very old race, and their culture is very established, very old. And the very recent, very newbie Federation culture is not. Let's just put it that way. And so later we see the advent of the Ferengi. The Ferengi have a lot in common with the Orions, but there's a lot of where they're really truly motivated by money and greed. The Orions are motivated by money and greed, but for different reasons. And it's not a religion to them as much a way of life, right? And anyway, so when the books came out, there's two of these. This is the Brian, the Book of Common Knowledge, and then there's one that's a companion book. And they came as a set. They came as a set, and then I have at least one roleplay adventure module set with the Orions. And the Orions themselves, from a game perspective, they occupy an area that's not far from the Triangle. And the Triangle is this kind of open port, no man's land, so to speak, where the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans all kind of come together into this triangular area. Well, it's a reverse triangle anyway, like this, Federation and Romulans and Klingons. And no one group has successfully dominated the triangle, and there's a number of independent entities and governments inside this region of space. And it's also been very one of those, it's kind of like Cold War Berlin, or early century Morocco, or something like that, Istanbul. It's left open for a reason, because all three sides can benefit from having a neutral area where they can interact unofficially or do other things and against each other without officially bringing the wrath of the entire Federation or the entire Klingons or the blah 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 down on each other and starting a war. So, we're talking a very interesting race. The Orions are actually three different distinct races in their hierarchy. The gray Orions are almost extinct, and they're some of the most deeply covered secrets of the Orions. The Ruddies, as they call themselves, are the leadership caste, or the leadership race of the Orions. And then the green Orions are more primitive. In some aspects they're primitive because they're kept that way, and other aspects they're primitive because they're designed that way. And that's something that brings us to an interesting concept. Kind of understanding the Orions is rough, in part because they were created by a race of other intentions that originally occupied the Rigelian system. Just like the Rigelians, who also still live in small numbers in the Rigelian system, are predecessors and not descendants, but created intelligent beings from a previous super advanced race who thought of themselves as almost godlike, and then eventually destroyed themselves. So, to give us a little bit, as the Vulcans are known for logic, Klingons for aggression, the Romulans for stoicism, the Orions have made a name for themselves in treachery. Although they do not work at it, treachery is a side effect of their particular self-centered way of looking at things. The Orion mind is complicated because Orions think in complicated ways. There are 5 basic facets of their way of thinking: opportunism, egocentricity, materialism, hedonism, and barbarity. And together these traits make the Orions maddeningly difficult to get along with, let alone understand. And then it goes on to break down those various, if left unchecked, opportunism would make Orions very dangerous. Fortunately, other traits balance their bargaining skill. For example, Orion egocentricity leads to overconfidence, which can be used against them. Most Orions are confident they can get what they want, and are not shy about letting people know. Proud of their brains, muscle, and wealth of powerful friends, they may show off just enough to trip themselves up, as an example. So this is a very capable species, and yet they're their own worst enemies. As a matter of fact, there's a section back here. The Orions don't like the Federation. They were there at the signing, but they refused to sign. They're actually they're a nation state of their own, but they're inside the Federation, which means there's a lot of conflict on the various levels between these two, because the Federation's constantly trying to absorb these the Orions and Rigel and turn them into good citizens, so to speak, and the Orions are fighting them every step of the way as best they can, without there being an actual open confrontation or occupation, if you will. And one of the things of interest is the Orions actually think quite highly of the humans. They felt that if the humans would be much better off if they hadn't been forced to form the Federation out of survival, and the fact that a lot of the human traits are almost like the Orions. The Orions can understand the humans, and they really enjoy interacting with them, and they're just obsessed with human history and anything human. So everything from Levi's to Western wear to soda pop to whatever, the Orions find as quite highly desirable trade goods. So we talked about the Orion's family. They're very social, and everything's around, kind of like the Klingons in that aspect, that the family is more important than the government, so to speak, but they all kind of work together, and their families can be quite extensive, almost mafia-like in operation. The corporations are another extension. It's just layer within layer. The government's almost like a sidebar. It's just there for what needs to be done. The Orions are also huge on revenge, getting even for when they think they've been screwed over. I'm just saying. Languages, Orion names. There's so much information here. I could do a 3-hour video and still not cover it all. I might do some of this later as secondary stuff, like I'm doing with the Articles of Federation and anyway. Well, like I said, out of all the races, the Orions and the Klingons are the best well established in the game, and with the most material available. Everybody knows about the humans because that's us, but the Vulcans we know quite a bit from the TV series, the books and stuff, but not as deeply as we know the Klingons. The Romulans are even more mysterious, and there's so much not known about the Romulans, and that's by choice to some degree. But when we look in the Federation, like I've said before, the Andorians, the Tellarites, we almost know nothing of them, and yet they're founding members of the Federation. Kind of sad. Even in the game, there's no Andorian version of this or a Tellarite version of this. It just may be that it never came up or they hadn't got to that point, but the lack of that information leaves those races open to a lot of player-generated what have you. You can take which kernels you know from the movies and TV and make your own version thereon, and there's no right or wrong. So I'm just saying, right? The history is ancient spacefarers. It says Alpha. The archives at Memory Alpha record the names of 2,493 spacefaring races known throughout history. Solid evidence for interstellar travel, identical artifacts on different planets goes back at least 500,000 years or 500 million years. Trace of habitational worlds incapable of supporting life suggests races with star drives existed at 1 million standard years ago, and there are indications that even then interstellar travel was old hat. The largest source of information in all these races is Rigel, where the largest source of information are where tiny fragments of nearly all these lost cultures have been found. Starfaring races with advanced civilizations now less than atoms have traded on the Rigelian worlds. It's like they're the trading, they're the corner, they're the crossroads of the galaxy. It's like all races at some point within range of Rigel end up on Rigel to trade and do business, and not just Rigel but the various planets. So the rise of the Orions, Treaty, Atomic, the Atom War, and the Long Winter, when the Orions almost obliterated themselves, the Orion Dawn, the Orion War. You see, there's a huge amount of information. Contract in reverse, the New Days, UFP Orion relations deteriorate, stellar counters, a timeline, 4-year war, recent developments. So the Council passing the First Amendment to the Articles of Federation banning the green slave trade outside Orion space. Orion colonies inside the Federation will hit hard financially. To protest, the Federation boycott prompted the BPC to declare a green slave trade illegal throughout the Orion neutrality area. Once again, the threatened loss of Federation trade had given the UFP what it wanted. However, once again, the Orion danced around the Federation law. Certainly, it would take more than an upstart alliance to destroy the foundation of Orion society. Besides, unpopular BPC policy was and still isn't unenforceable within the Orion space. Talks about pirating and blah blah blah. I mean, just look at a couple episodes of Enterprise and you really get a good flavor. They did a good job of representing the Orions as the game would see them, as the material was. We talk about the Rigelium system, and one of the great unfathomed things about the Rigelium system is that it appears to be made or formed at some point artificially, and there's evidence that some of these planets, most of these planets have been terraformed in some form or another. A lot of the species that inhabit them were created or transported from somewhere else and adapted to the system, to the various planets, including a lot of the races such as the Orions. Astrologically, the Rigel star system resides just forward side of the Orion arm of the galaxy belt of hydrogen rich with large bright stars, equal access to both sides of the arm. The Rigel system resides almost exactly between the Federation, Klingon Empire, blah blah blah. And it talks about 14 planets, more than half are habitable. Archaeological evidence shows that hundreds of spacefaring races have visited Rigel for tens of thousands of years, and a few have claimed it as prime real estate in a commanding location. The Orions originated in the Rigel system, and more than 1,000 years it's been under their exclusive control. Although the Rigel is not the sole reason for their power, it shaped them and helped them to achieve all they have. So, like I said, there's so much information you can't really capture all of it in one video. Capsule history, doing business, physical direction, various planets. We're still working our way through the course. And we got the Orion colonies, the map, United Federation of Planets. These are Orion colonies that are now within the Federation. Some are members of the active members of the Federation. Some are still pending approval because they just can't give up the Orion social and societal morals. They get the Klingon Empire, which also includes a number of planets that are dominated by Orions. Go figure. Orion space. So you see there's a huge amount of opportunity, gameplay, just interacting with Orions and their holdings, and the areas that they are in are very conflict-oriented section of Alpha Quadrant, which I always thought was odd that they didn't see more of them in the TV, like in Next Generation and in the first TV series. Then we go into the talk about the slave life, slavery, those green animal women, the slave trade. And like I said, I'm not going to get into details on these things at this time. There's so much information. I could do a series of videos on them. Orion traders and businessmen, some Orion blockade runners, Orion ships, native designs, borrowed technology, native technology. There you have it. Book of Common Knowledge and the Orion character sheet. See, now the second book is called the Book of Deep Knowledge. I've been pre-reading that one too. Provides information on only the Game Master and Orion characters. Fills in the gap of the history. Presents the character generation system. Describes the families, corporations. Gives them much more detail. This is what everybody in the Federation would generally know if they wanted to know something about the Orions. And then this would be the Orions handbook would be the Book of Deep Knowledge, because that's the one where we got all the stats and the adjustments and how to create character generation for the Orions and their things that you would not be commonly known. And yeah, you know what I'm saying. So there you have it, the Orions.